Evelyn Carter had always been the kind of woman people admired from afar. With her effortless grace, striking green eyes, and a presence that could light up any room, she looked every bit the picture of success. But what truly made people talk wasn't just Evelyn herself, it was the life she shared with Richard Carter. To the outside world, they were the golden couple, the kind of power duo people read about in magazines and envied on social media. Their lives unfolded like scenes from a modern-day fairy tale: black-tie galas in sprawling mansions, luxury vacations to private islands, charity events where their names were spoken in reverence, and sleek photographs of them laughing together, hand in hand, as if they were untouched by the world's troubles. Richard Carter, Evelyn's husband of 5 years, was the epitome of wealth and influence. His empire stretched across real estate, tech startups, and high-end hospitality. His face appeared on magazine covers, his quotes splashed across financial news. With salt-and-pepper hair, sharp features, and a disarming smile, Richard had the kind of charisma that made people lean in, listen, and trust him, often against their better judgment. To the world, he was a visionary businessman, a generous philanthropist, and a devoted husband. Evelyn had played her part well. She had mastered the art of the poised smile, the graceful wave, the supportive, doting wife role that Richard expected of her. She attended every gala in designer gowns worth more than some people's annual salaries, posed for flawless photographs with him, laughed at the right moments, and hosted extravagant dinners that left their guests awestruck. But behind the shimmering facade, Evelyn's reality was far from perfect. It was, in truth, suffocating. The cracks in their so-called fairy tale had started small, easy to dismiss at first. Richard's compliments began to feel like veiled instructions. "You look stunning in that dress, but maybe wear your hair down next time, it softens your jawline." His concern often came wrapped in control. "You don't need to worry about finances, sweetheart. I'll handle everything. Just focus on being my beautiful wife." At first, she thought it was just part of being with a powerful man. But over time, the subtle erosion of her independence became impossible to ignore. Their home, a sprawling penthouse overlooking the city skyline, felt more like a glass prison than a sanctuary. Security cameras were everywhere, and not just for protection. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that Richard always knew where she was, what she was doing, who she was speaking to. It wasn't paranoia if it was true. The staff were polite, but distant, their loyalties firmly aligned with Richard. Even her phone and emails, she suspected, weren't entirely private. Behind closed doors, the charismatic Richard transformed. His smile faded, his eyes grew cold, and his words, though still measured and calculated, carried an undeniable sharpness. He didn't yell or throw things, he didn't need to. His power came from quiet intimidation, the kind that left no bruises but carved deep scars in the mind. If Evelyn questioned him, his patience thinned quickly. If she pushed too hard, his temper simmered just beneath the surface, restrained but deadly. There were nights when she lay awake in their king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how her life had turned into this. How the man who had once swept her off her feet, promising the world, had become the person she feared the most. Friends had drifted away, some by her own choice, others subtly edged out by Richard's influence. Her family, though loving, lived across the country, and her calls to them had become fewer, her words more carefully chosen. Despite the diamonds, the champagne, the red carpets, Evelyn was alone, and she knew it. Her life, so admired by millions online, was a well-crafted illusion. A gilded cage, sparkling from the outside but cold and unforgiving within. And as each day passed, her growing suspicion whispered louder: Richard's possessiveness wasn't love, it was control. And beneath that control, something far more dangerous simmered, waiting for its moment to strike. It started with a forgotten phone. Evelyn hadn't been snooping, not at first. Richard had left his latest phone on the kitchen counter, the sleek device buzzing with incoming messages as he paced the living room, speaking to someone through his earpiece. His voice was low, tense, but that wasn't unusual lately. Richard had been irritable, distracted, on edge. Something was brewing beneath his polished exterior, and Evelyn could feel it in the air like an approaching storm. When the phone buzzed again, her eyes flicked toward it. The name flashing across the screen wasn't familiar: Sienna, followed by a string of hearts and kisses. Evelyn's stomach turned cold. Against her better judgment, she picked it up, her hands trembling slightly as she scrolled through the latest messages. I can't stop thinking about last night. The necklace is stunning, Richard. You spoil me. When can I see you again? I miss your touch. Be careful tonight, your wife's no fool. Evelyn's breath hitched as the words blurred before her eyes. The reality of what she was reading crashed over her like a tidal wave. The lavish jewelry that Richard had claimed was for a business partner's wife? A lie. The late nights at the office? Another lie. The cracks in their marriage weren't just emotional. They were real, tangible, undeniable. The memories came rushing back in painful clarity. The charming Richard who had swept her off her feet all those years ago. The grand gestures, the expensive gifts, the way he made her feel like the only woman in the world. But even then, there had been signs, little moments she had brushed aside. The possessive comments disguised as compliments, the subtle isolation from friends, the growing sense that her life wasn't entirely her own. And then there were the darker moments, the ones hidden behind closed doors. The way his voice could drop to an icy whisper that made her knees weak with fear. How his gaze, so warm in public, turned sharp and calculating in private. He never needed to raise a hand. His words were weapons enough, slicing through her confidence until she questioned her own judgment, her own worth. But now, the messages were undeniable proof. Her husband was unfaithful. Worse, he was reckless. And something told her this affair was just the beginning. Later that night, when she confronted him, the mask slipped, but only slightly. Richard didn't deny it. He didn't apologize, either. Instead, he smiled, cold and amused, like a man indulging a child's tantrum. You've been lonely, Evelyn. I've seen it. I was trying to protect you. From the truth, from yourself. But maybe now you'll understand your place. His words dripped with quiet menace, each syllable carefully chosen, his tone soft but suffocating. Evelyn had never felt so powerless, and yet, so awake. Desperate for clarity, she reached out to the only person she truly trusted, Daniel, her childhood friend. They had grown up together, their bond forged in simpler, safer times before wealth and influence had swallowed her world whole. Daniel had always been honest, grounded, someone who saw through the glittering facade of her life. They met at a quiet cafe tucked away from the bustling city, a place untouched by paparazzi and prying eyes. As soon as she saw him, his familiar, concerned eyes, the slight scar on his chin from a childhood fall, Evelyn's walls nearly crumbled. She told him everything. The messages, the gifts, the chilling conversation with Richard. Daniel listened without interruption, his expression darkening with every word. You need to be careful, Ev, he warned, his voice low. Richard's not the type to take betrayal lightly, and in his mind, you confronting him is betrayal. He's dangerous. Evelyn wanted to argue, to insist that Richard wasn't capable of true harm. But deep down, she already knew better. As if her personal life wasn't in enough turmoil, the headlines the next morning made everything worse. Whispers of scandal surrounding Richard's business began to surface. Anonymous sources claiming embezzlement, shady offshore accounts, questionable partnerships. The media vultures circled, smelling blood in the water. Richard's frustration was palpable. His normally controlled demeanor cracked, short tempers, barking orders at staff, sleepless nights pacing the penthouse. The empire he'd built, the spotless reputation he had crafted so meticulously, was under threat. Evelyn watched it all unfold, the perfect facade crumbling. But beneath her growing fear was something else. The undeniable realization that if Richard was capable of betraying her so easily, he might be capable of far worse. The walls were closing in, and Richard Carter could feel it. The empire he had built with precision and ruthlessness was beginning to fracture. The embezzlement rumors, the whispers in boardrooms, the nervous glances from his closest associates, all signs of weakness, all threats to his control. But it wasn't the vultures in the corporate world that kept him awake at night. It was Evelyn. His perfect wife, once pliant and naive, had become a liability. She asked questions now. She watched him with eyes that saw too much. Her confrontation about the affair had been inconvenient, but manageable. What unsettled him was the quiet, lingering defiance beneath her fear. The subtle way she withdrew, plotting something behind that delicate facade. He had underestimated her, and Richard Carter never made the same mistake twice. He paced the floor of his private study, the city lights glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection sharp and cold in the glass. His mind, ever strategic, dissected the problem with surgical precision. Divorce wasn't an option. The scandal alone would ruin him, his pristine image shattered, his business partners scrambling to distance themselves, the media circling like hyenas. No, Evelyn's exit had to be clean, tragic, and above all, believable. The plan began to take shape, as methodical and calculated as any hostile takeover. He would eliminate Evelyn, and the world would mourn the tragic, untimely death of Richard Carter's beloved wife. The public would pity him, rally behind him. The media would devour the narrative he fed them, and his empire would remain intact. First, the setting. Somewhere remote, away from cameras, witnesses, complications. A countryside retreat, the perfect cover. He proposed it to Evelyn as a romantic getaway, a chance to reconnect, to escape the noise of the city and the prying eyes. He could still fake sincerity so effortlessly, it was second nature by now. She had hesitated at first, suspicion flickering in her eyes, but eventually agreed. Desperation made people predictable. The location had been chosen with care. A secluded estate nestled near the forest, picturesque and isolated. More importantly, it was walking distance from an old, nearly abandoned train station. The tracks still saw occasional use, enough for plausibility, not enough for regular foot traffic. It was perfect. But a tragic accident wasn't enough. Richard needed the story to be airtight, beyond reproach. That's where James Holloway came in, a private investigator with a reputation for discretion and moral flexibility. Richard paid him handsomely, far more than the man's usual rates, to construct the foundation of Evelyn's supposed unraveling. Medical records were forged, fabricated therapist notes about depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. Prescription bottles appeared in Evelyn's name, filled with harmless vitamins disguised as mood stabilizers. Bank transactions carefully planted to suggest extravagant, erratic spending. It would all paint the perfect picture, a fragile woman, overwhelmed by public life, descending into quiet despair. The more Richard constructed the narrative, the more invigorated he became. He wasn't just preserving his legacy, he was erasing a threat. And in his mind, that was not murder. It was self-defense. The weak fell, the strong survived. That had always been the way of the world. He rehearsed every detail of the night. After dinner at the estate, they would take a walk, under the stars, he'd say, rekindling their love. They would wander to the old train station. He could already picture the scene, the cold steel of the tracks, the distant rumble of an approaching train, the perfect moment. She'd be walking ahead, perhaps pausing to admire the view, or maybe to voice some final, futile suspicion. And when her guard was down, he would act. A firm shove, quick and calculated. The train would do the rest. His expression remained calm, almost gentle, as he visualized the aftermath. The authorities would investigate, of course, but all trails would lead to the same conclusion: a grieving husband, a tragic accident, a broken-hearted survivor. Holloway's fabricated evidence would ensure that even whispers of foul play were dismissed. Richard would emerge not only untouched but more powerful, sympathetic, admired, the widower who endured unspeakable loss yet carried on. In the mirror, Richard studied his own reflection, the same charming smile, the same sharp eyes that had disarmed so many. Beneath the tailored suits and philanthropic speeches, beneath the affectionate public displays, was the man he truly was, cold, strategic, untouchable. Love. It was a currency, a tool. Morality. An inconvenience for the weak. And Evelyn, once his prized possession, had outlived her usefulness. But soon, everything would be set right. His empire would endure. His reputation would remain immaculate. And Evelyn Carter, beautiful, naive Evelyn, would simply disappear. The countryside retreat was everything Richard had promised, secluded, picturesque, and unervingly quiet. The sprawling estate sat nestled between thick woods and open meadows, its old-world charm masking the chilling purpose behind their visit. Stone walls wrapped around the property, ivy creeping along weathered surfaces, and tall windows framed the vast, darkening sky. It was beautiful, no doubt, but beneath the surface, something felt off. Evelyn stepped out of the car, her heels crunching softly against the gravel driveway. A cool breeze swept through the air, rustling the trees that loomed in the distance. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows across the estate grounds. She folded her arms, eyeing the retreat with cautious curiosity. Richard, ever the polished host, slipped an arm around her waist, pressing a kiss to her temple. His touch was warm, his smile charming, but to Evelyn, it all felt rehearsed, hollow. "What do you think, darling?" he asked smoothly. "Just the two of us. No cameras, no city noise, no distractions." Evelyn forced a smile, her instincts screaming beneath the surface. "It's quiet," she replied, carefully neutral. "Very quiet." He chuckled, his eyes crinkling in that familiar, public-friendly way. "Exactly what we need." Inside, the estate was tastefully furnished, vintage decor, roaring fireplaces, expensive wine chilling in the fridge. Yet despite the luxury, an uneasy tension clung to every corner. Evelyn could feel it in Richard's overly attentive behavior, the way his eyes lingered on her just a moment too long, the way his phone remained off the entire time. It wasn't just a romantic getaway. She was sure of it. Dinner passed in strained pleasantries. Richard poured the wine, asked about her sleep, her stress levels, his tone lined with condescension masked as concern. Evelyn played her part, smiling, nodding, answering in short, calculated responses. Beneath the table, her hands were clenched into tight fists. When night fell, Richard suggested a walk. The words were casual, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something darker. "Fresh air will do us good," he said lightly, taking her coat from the stand by the door. "Clear our minds." Evelyn hesitated for a fraction of a second, but nodded, masking her unease with a soft smile. "Sure," she replied. "Lead the way." The gravel path crunched beneath their feet as they wandered past the estate grounds, beyond the neatly trimmed hedges, toward the wooded trail Richard insisted was charming. Moonlight filtered through the trees, casting ghostly patterns along the ground. The forest was silent, save for the distant rustling of branches and the rhythmic crunch of their footsteps. They walked in silence for several minutes, the darkness growing heavier around them. And then, as they cleared the tree line, Evelyn saw it, the old train station. It stood like a forgotten relic from another time. The weathered wooden platform sagged slightly, its planks cracked with age. Faded paint peeled from the station walls, and a rusted bench sat beneath a crooked lamp that flickered dimly in the cold night air. The tracks stretched into the darkness, cold steel glinting faintly under the pale moonlight. A low, distant hum broke the silence, the faint rumble of an approaching train. Evelyn's pulse quickened. Her suspicions crystallized into certainty. This was no innocent stroll. This was a stage, carefully chosen, perfectly timed. "Remember when we used to take late-night walks?" Richard's voice was calm, laced with artificial nostalgia. Those simpler days, no headlines, no stress. Evelyn nodded, her face an unreadable mask. Hard to forget. They stepped onto the platform. The distant train's headlights cut through the night like twin stars, steadily approaching. Richard's gaze shifted to the tracks, then to Evelyn, calculating, predatory. For a moment, the world was eerily still, the soft whistle of the wind, the quiet hum of the train growing louder, the tension thickening like fog around them. Then Richard moved. It happened in a flash, a calculated shove, his hands pressing firmly against her back with the intent to send her stumbling onto the tracks. But Evelyn had been ready. Her instincts had been sharpened by weeks of dread, by every red flag, by every cold, dismissive glance he'd thrown her way. She twisted to the side, slipping out of his grip just as his hands made contact. His momentum, fueled by confidence and force, sent him staggering forward instead. Evelyn's heart thundered as she stepped back, her breath coming in sharp, controlled bursts. Richard caught himself, straightening, fury flashing across his face for a fraction of a second before he masked it behind that dangerous, familiar charm. "Careful," he said smoothly, his voice like silk over broken glass. "Wouldn't want anyone to get hurt." But Evelyn wasn't playing along anymore. Evelyn's pulse roared in her ears, but her expression remained unreadable as Richard straightened, adjusting the collar of his coat like nothing had happened. His calculated smile remained fixed in place, but behind his eyes, the truth simmered, cold, malicious, and hungry for control. He was going to try again. She could feel it in the rigid set of his shoulders, the practiced charm slipping ever so slightly at the edges. But this time, she wasn't the naive, unprotected woman he thought she was. What Richard didn't know was that she had been preparing for this night long before they arrived at the retreat. The messages from his mistress, the forged medical records conveniently left where she might stumble across them, the subtle manipulation of their conversations, it had all been too perfect, too staged. Richard's greatest flaw wasn't his ruthlessness, it was his arrogance. He believed himself untouchable, so certain in his ability to control every detail, every outcome. But Evelyn had quietly taken back control. In the weeks leading up to the trip, she had reached out to Daniel, the one person she trusted implicitly. Once a close childhood friend, Daniel had left behind small-town life to become a private security consultant, working for high-profile clients who needed protection from threats both public and private. When she told him everything, the affair, the forged evidence, the suffocating surveillance, he hadn't hesitated. "It's not just manipulation anymore, Ev," he had said, his voice sharp with concern. "It's escalation. He's setting you up for something permanent." Evelyn had nodded, her jaw clenched with determination. "I know. That's why I need you there." Together, they had devised a plan. Hidden cameras had been placed in the penthouse, catching Richard's late-night phone calls, his meetings with the shady private investigator, the quiet conversations about how easy it would be if Evelyn wasn't around. Documents had been copied, files collected, conversations recorded. Daniel had shadowed Richard's movements, learning his patterns, his contacts. And when Richard proposed the romantic getaway, Daniel had followed, silent, unseen, prepared. Now, standing on the deserted platform, Evelyn kept her expression blank as the approaching train's horn echoed through the empty night. The ground trembled beneath her feet, the rails humming with the promise of unstoppable force. Richard's hand twitched at his side, his gaze flicking to the tracks, then back to her. He stepped forward again, faster this time, abandoning pretense entirely. But Evelyn was ready. As he lunged, she sidestepped swiftly, his momentum carrying him off balance. His foot slipped on the damp wooden planks of the platform, sending him staggering toward the edge. A sharp curse escaped his lips as he flailed to regain control. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, Daniel. His appearance was swift, precise, the years of tactical training evident in every movement. He caught Richard by the arm, jerking him backward just before he toppled off the platform. But Richard wasn't one to surrender, even in the face of disaster. He twisted violently, shoving at Daniel's chest, fury overtaking reason. His foot, still slick from the misstep, caught on the platform's uneven edge. Time seemed to slow as Richard's body pitched forward, his arms windmilling uselessly in the air. The deafening blast of the train horn shattered the momentary silence. Evelyn's breath caught as Richard fell onto the tracks, the steel rails gleaming beneath him. The massive freight train bore down, its headlights blinding, its mechanical roar consuming everything. "Richard!" Daniel shouted, instinct driving him forward, but it was too late. The impact was brutal, final. The train thundered over the tracks, a sickening, metallic screech filling the night. Evelyn turned away, her stomach churning, her hand pressed to her mouth. But even as horror twisted inside her, another emotion bloomed beneath the surface: liberation. When the train finally passed, leaving only silence and shattered remnants behind, Daniel approached her, his face grim, his expression unreadable. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos that had just unfolded. Evelyn nodded slowly, her eyes glassy, her pulse still racing. I knew he was capable of terrible things. But even I didn't expect it to end like this. Daniel's gaze softened for a moment, his hand briefly brushing against her shoulder in silent reassurance. He made his choices, Evelyn. He set this in motion. You just survived it. They stood in silence for a long moment, the night heavy with finality. In the distance, the estate loomed, untouched, as though nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The man who had caged her, controlled her, manipulated her with ruthless precision, was gone. Evelyn inhaled deeply, the cold air biting at her lungs. For the first time in years, she could breathe without fear, without calculated smiles or walking on eggshells. She was horrified, yes, but beneath the horror was freedom. As Daniel gently guided her away from the tracks, Evelyn didn't look back. There was nothing left behind her worth holding on to. The flashing red and blue lights painted the abandoned train station in eerie strokes as police vehicles rolled onto the scene. The quiet of the countryside was shattered by the hum of radios, the clipped orders of officers securing the area, and the low murmur of investigators piecing together the chaotic fragments of what had just happened. Evelyn sat on the edge of the old wooden platform, wrapped in a blanket provided by one of the officers, her body trembling, though whether it was from the cold night air or the storm of emotions inside her, she couldn't tell. Daniel stood nearby, calm and composed, briefing the lead detective with unwavering confidence. In his hand were the meticulously organized documents, digital files, and surveillance footage they had gathered over the past few weeks, the undeniable proof of Richard's premeditated plan to murder Evelyn. Daniel had handed them over without hesitation, his voice steady as he explained Richard's calculated steps, the fabricated medical records, the hired private investigator, and the attempted manipulation of Evelyn's public image. The detective, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, studied the evidence with growing grimness. Your husband wasn't just planning an accident, she muttered, flipping through the documents. He wanted to destroy you, first your reputation, then your life. Evelyn nodded weakly, her throat tightening at the stark truth. He always cared more about control than love, she whispered, her voice hollow. As dawn broke, news of Richard's death exploded across television screens and social media. But the narrative wasn't the neat, sympathetic story Richard had hoped for. Instead, it was chaos, headline after headline exposing the web of deceit he had hidden behind his polished facade. Billionaire Richard Carter killed in tragic train accident, but the truth is far darker. Murder plot uncovered. Shocking evidence reveals Carter's scheme against wife. Empire in ruins. Authorities investigating Carter's business for embezzlement and fraud. The authorities wasted no time. Search warrants were executed at Richard's corporate offices, his bank accounts frozen, files seized. Offshore holdings, shell companies, and records of blackmail and bribery came tumbling into the light. The empire Richard had so ruthlessly protected was disintegrating piece by piece, exposing the rot beneath its glossy surface. For Evelyn, the following days were a whirlwind of media attention, police interviews, and legal formalities. Reporters swarmed outside her apartment building. Paparazzi camped outside her family's home. Talk shows debated every detail of her life, her marriage, her mental state, her future. There were those who pitied her, the betrayed wife who had escaped a murderous husband. There were others, skeptics and sensationalists, spinning wild theories about her involvement, her knowledge, even her potential complicity. Every photograph of her was analyzed, every tear dissected, every expression speculated upon. Despite Daniel's constant support, the emotional toll gnawed at her. The sleepless nights, the panic that jolted her awake, the haunting memory of Richard's final moments on the tracks, it clung to her like a second skin. There were moments she questioned everything, the love she thought she had known, the life she had carefully constructed, the naive trust that had nearly cost her everything. But even in her weakest moments, Evelyn refused to let Richard's shadow consume her. She had survived him. She wouldn't be broken by his ghost. That resolve was tested one final time when Julian Briggs, Richard's longtime lawyer, arrived uninvited at her apartment. Immaculately dressed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Julian carried himself with the same oily confidence that had made him invaluable to Richard for years. "I'm here as a courtesy, Evelyn," he began smoothly, placing a sleek folder on her kitchen counter. "There are ways to make this whole mess quieter. Less public spectacle, fewer legal headaches for you." Evelyn eyed him, her jaw tightening. "What are you offering?" "A settlement. The estate, the businesses, cleaned up, discreetly transferred. No need for you to suffer under media scrutiny or drawn-out investigations. Of course." His gaze sharpened. "In return, you'd soften your public statements. Let Richard rest with some dignity. Protect the reputation, for the shareholders, for the legacy." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then, Evelyn straightened, her voice calm but steely. "Richard's dignity died long before he did. And as for protecting his legacy..." She pushed the folder back toward him. "I'm done protecting monsters." Julian's mask cracked, if only for a second, but he recovered quickly, offering a tight, cold smile. "Very well," he said, collecting the folder. "But don't expect them to stop coming for you." Evelyn held his gaze, unflinching. Let them come. She had faced the worst and survived. And now, finally, she was ready to fight for herself, on her own terms. 6 months had passed since that cold, harrowing night at the train station. 6 months since the man who had once held her life in a suffocating grip had fallen victim to his own twisted ambition. In that time, Evelyn Carter had become someone entirely new. A woman no longer defined by fear, deception, or survival, but by strength, resolve, and quiet power. The world had watched her transformation with insatiable curiosity. Headlines that once painted her as a shattered widow now spoke of her with cautious respect. "Billionaire widow turns tragedy into triumph. Evelyn Carter, from betrayal to philanthropy." The same people who whispered behind her back at charity galas now nodded approvingly as she strode into boardrooms, her chin high, her voice steady. The legal storm had finally settled. Richard's tangled empire had been dismantled, the rotten core of his business dealings exposed for all to see. Investigations had led to arrests, partnerships severed, and reputations destroyed. But through it all, Evelyn had stood firm. Her inheritance, vast and complex, had passed into her control, not by choice, but by inevitability. And with it came the power to rewrite the narrative. Instead of retreating from the world, Evelyn had leaned into it. She established the Evelyn Carter Foundation, funneling Richard's ill-gotten wealth into causes that mattered: shelters for abused women, legal aid for victims trapped in manipulative relationships, and mental health initiatives designed to empower those too often silenced by stigma and fear. She refused to let the fortune that nearly destroyed her become a symbol of greed or corruption. Instead, it became a weapon for good, one she wielded unapologetically. Daniel remained by her side, a constant, grounding presence. He had been her shield when no one else believed her, her confidant when the world turned cold. Their connection, once rooted in friendship and protection, had deepened in the quiet moments between media chaos and legal battles. Though unspoken, the possibility of something more lingered in the air, a gentle, unforced tension that neither rushed to define. It wasn't romance that Evelyn sought. Not yet. She was still rebuilding herself, still learning how to stand without the shadows of Richard's control trailing behind her. But with Daniel, she felt safe, seen. And for now, that was enough. The reflection in her mirror had changed. The fragile, unsure woman who had smiled through gala events and tiptoed around her husband's moods was gone. In her place stood a woman with clear eyes, steady hands, and a quiet, unshakable fire. Her smile was no longer forced. Her posture no longer tentative. Evelyn Carter had risen from the ashes of her old life, not as a victim, but as a survivor, a leader, a woman untethered from fear. That realization settled within her as she stood once again at the old train station. The weathered platform remained unchanged, the faded wood, the rusted metal, the endless stretch of tracks slicing through the wilderness. But the station no longer held the same icy grip over her heart. It wasn't a place of death anymore, it was a monument to her survival. Evelyn inhaled the cool evening air, the distant sound of an approaching train whispering through the quiet. She didn't flinch. She didn't step back. Her feet remained firmly planted, her posture relaxed, her expression calm. She had faced the worst a person could endure. Betrayal, manipulation, a carefully orchestrated plan to erase her. But she had outsmarted him. She had survived the fall. And now, the tracks stretched ahead of her, not as a threat, but as a symbol of everything that lay beyond. Uncharted, unpredictable, but entirely hers to claim. As the train rumbled past, Evelyn watched it disappear into the horizon, her reflection faint in the glass of its windows. No fear. No regret. Only control. Only freedom. The late afternoon sun bathed the city in golden light as Evelyn Carter sipped her coffee on the terrace of her high-rise apartment. 6 months of rebuilding, of untangling herself from Richard's dark legacy, had granted her a new life, but beneath the surface, the old shadows still lingered. She could feel them in the tightness of her chest, in the whispers that followed her through boardrooms and charity galas, in the unease that gnawed at the edges of her hard-won peace. It started with the feeling of being watched. At first, she brushed it off as paranoia. After everything she had endured, it was only natural to be on edge. But it happened again and again, the same unfamiliar faces lurking just beyond her periphery. A man in a dark coat lingering near her car in the underground parking garage. A pair of sharp eyes trailing her at the cafe across from her foundation's office. A black SUV idling a little too long outside her building late at night. She mentioned it to Daniel, expecting him to tell her it was nothing. Instead, his face darkened with concern. "I've noticed them too," he admitted, his jaw clenched. "They're not paparazzi, Evelyn. They're watching you, but not for headlines." A cold knot twisted in her stomach. "Who are they?" Daniel hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "Richard's old associates. The kind of people who don't like loose ends, or missing money." It made sense. With Richard gone, the empire he had built had been cracked open, exposing offshore accounts, illegal partnerships, and shady dealings that went far beyond corporate fraud. The authorities had seized most of it, but rumors persisted that some of Richard's wealth had vanished, untraceable, hidden away by trusted allies who weren't ready to let it go. And now, they suspected her. "You think they believe I had something to do with Richard's death?" Evelyn asked quietly, the weight of the implication settling heavily on her chest. "They don't think," Daniel replied grimly. "They suspect. And they don't care about the truth, they care about protecting themselves." The paranoia was no longer paranoia. It was reality creeping back in, darker than before. That evening, as twilight settled over the city, Evelyn found a package at her door. No return address, no markings. The envelope inside was heavy, expensive paper, the kind Richard had favored for personal correspondence. Her heart quickened as she carefully slid the letter from its sleeve. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, elegant, and undeniably Richard's. She unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the carefully written words. "If you're reading this, Evelyn, then the inevitable has happened. But don't fool yourself into thinking you've won. You always were clever, but not clever enough to see the whole board. There are pieces in play you don't even know exist. Friends in high places, secrets buried so deep even death can't silence them. Enjoy your moment of freedom, my dear. It won't last." The letter ended with a set of numbers, coordinates, she realized, and a single phrase beneath them. "It's not over." Evelyn's pulse pounded in her ears as she read the letter again, the chill of Richard's calculated cruelty lingering in every stroke of ink. Even from beyond the grave, he had woven his web, and now, she was caught in the middle of it once more. The next day, she shared the letter with Daniel. He read it in silence, his expression hardening with every line. "We need to find out what those coordinates lead to," he said firmly. "If Richard's allies are still out there, they won't stop until they get what they want. And this." He tapped the letter. "This is just the beginning." Evelyn stared at the paper, her resolve hardening like stone. She had thought her battle was over, that she had stepped out of Richard's shadow for good. But it was clear now that his reach extended further than death, his influence still clawing at her from the grave. As she stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker to life below, she felt the familiar weight of fear settle over her. But this time, fear didn't weaken her. It fueled her. Richard's game wasn't over, but neither was hers. And this time, she wasn't playing by his rules. The battle had only just begun.